Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this next episode of Center of Excellence program, which is being conducted by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and AIMS together. And we've been taking different topics uh, in each program. And today there's a very important topic on how to optimize pregnancy outcomes during COVID-19. Just like all the emergencies, again, obstetrics is something which cannot be pushed to a later date, and it must be managed like all the emergencies are managed during these times. And then we've had a very active obstetric and gynecology department who has been managing these mothers and the children, uh, and has been getting great outcomes for them despite the problems of pandemic. And to share this experience today, we have faculty colleagues from Department of Gynecology and Obstetric who are going to make a small presentation, and then we'll have a panel discussion on how to manage. And we'll take up all your questions on this topic and also on topics which you've sent on neonate and on medical management during pregnancy. So we'll take up those questions during the panel discussion. So I will first of all invite my colleague Dr. Aparna Sharma from the Department of Gynecology and Obstetrics to make a brief presentation on this topic, and then we'll take it up from there to answer the questions which have been sent by you, and also any other questions that you pose on the chat box. So may I request Aparna to kindly start with your presentation. We'll share the slides and then
A very good evening to all of you, and thank you, sir. And I would really thank our institute for providing this platform and the MOHFW for taking this forward. Would really like to thank our HOD Professor Sunesh Kumar and our teams for the timely management of the COVID patients and the facility changes that have been done in our department, which have really given us an insight into the management of COVID patients. Can we have the slides, please?
I will make
Yeah, I'll do.
questions. I'm sorry.
So, when we talk about the management of COVID in pregnancy, I would like to discuss this under two parts. One would be optimizing pregnancy outcome during the antenatal period, because we all know that pregnancy has to be taken up right from the very beginning, and also the management of pregnancy and delivery, the intrapartum part. So, when we talk about the antenatal care in pregnancy, yes. So when we talk about the antenatal care in the pregnancy, we will just briefly talk about the effect of the COVID on the mother. So we all know about the COVID-19 infection, that it spreads from person to person. When we talk about the effect of COVID-19 on the mother, we have seen that some of the viral infection are worse in pregnant women. However, as far as the COVID virus, coronavirus infection is concerned, in the pandemic, there has not been seen to be much of such an evidence for the mother or the pregnant women. So women are not more susceptible. The maternal disease is not aggravated by pregnancy unless there are associated comorbidities. So, if there is comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, or some other background disorders like heart disease, chronic liver disease, or immunocompromised situations, in that situations, then maybe the pregnancy outcomes would be worsened. But otherwise, the situations are not so bad. So it is important to take precautions against COVID-19, report the possible symptoms to the health providers. Now, in the majority of situations, what we really need to understand that it is like a simple flu with cough, sore throat, which will come, which will go. However, a month in a minimal number of patients, in a small minority of patients, there will be severe symptoms like shortness of breath resulting leading even up to pneumonia and marked hypoxia, and they might get critically ill, and especially immunocompromised or elderly pregnant women. Does it affect the fetus? And I think when we come to pregnancy, that's the biggest question in our mind. Now, there has not been reported to be an increased risk of miscarriage or an early pregnancy loss. When we talk about, mother to child transmission, there is no increased risk of intrauterine transmission, congenital malformation, effect on fetal growth, vertical transmission, or transmission through genital fluids. So, but there might be a small increased risk of preterm birth, which is birth before time. That's a small increased risk, which might be also initially because of iatrogenicity or maybe small spontaneous increased risk. So, what do we need to prepare for is the consequence of the infection of the mother, consequence of the infection to the newborn, spread of the infection from the infected pregnant woman to the other pregnant woman, and the spread of infection from the infected pregnant woman to the healthcare provider. In the middle of all this, we have to remember to provide a high quality of care with respect and dignity. So, when we talk about antenatal care, the important aspects to be covered are the antenatal contacts. When does the pregnant woman actually need to visit? What are the advice on diet, hygiene, travel and quarantine? And what is the advice to the pregnant healthcare worker? Now, when we talk about antenatal contact, we have been traditionally advising 8 visits, but now we say reduce, postpone, or increase the interval between the visit, shorten the duration of the visit, limit the number of visitors, individualize plan, but if it's a high risk pregnancy, continue to provide the normal care. So, I would again say do the 4 minimum contact at 12, 20, 28, and 36. So if it's a low risk woman, at least these 4 visits should be done. Apart from the earlier we used to say those 8 visit model, but now at least 12, 20, 28, and 36 visit model. Now we are increasingly moving towards telemedicine, teleconferencing, video conferencing to reduce the time of the visit, reduce the number of visits. What can be done? Online communication, virtual prenatal visits, and we can have those, these things to improve the mental health care during pregnancy. And let me tell you, I think we are all facing this problem as pregnancy healthcare providers that women are getting stressed about, more and more stressed about their pregnancy care and the care during pregnancy. So if the mother is not coming to a healthcare facility, what she can do at home after, especially once she starts feeling the fetal movement count, is she can actually monitor her fetal movement count at home, maybe take her blood pressure at home and monitor her weight at home. Dietary advice in this COVID pandemic, a lot has been said about diet. Don't eat chicken, eat eggs. Maybe the virus will get transmitted. However, it is not evidence based. There is no particular diet to treat or improve or immune status or reduce the infection risk significantly. Just take good balanced diet with vitamin and micronutrient supplementation, which you would anyways take in your pregnancy. So good diet, iron, calcium supplementation is recommended during pregnancy. Attention to hygiene, so which is you would anyways do for COVID-19 infection. Do the 5. Stay at home as much as possible, hand hygiene, avoid touching the face, social distancing, and respiratory hygiene. So this is very, very important if you are pregnant. This is anyway important if you are anybody in this COVID pandemic, but for pregnancy, it becomes much, much more important. Advice on travel, nobody is traveling too much these days. However, it becomes much, much more important for pregnant women and also for people who are taking care of pregnant women. I must mention at this point in time that we at AIMS delivered the first pregnant woman in this country, and the contact of that pregnant woman was actually the husband. The pregnant woman was at home. So I think it's not just the pregnant woman, but the contact of that pregnant woman who becomes the carrier. So it's very important for all the household people. And this is what is shielding. So when you are actually, shielding is an extreme form of social isolation where we are protecting the clinically extremely vulnerable people, and especially pregnant women with significant heart disease, congenital or acquired or immunocompromised women, where they minimize all interaction with the people and they stay at home at all times for at least 12 weeks. So if the woman is a very high risk woman, then you might need to take extra precautions in those kind of women. Now, this question has come to us from various quarters, from the ministry, from pregnant healthcare workers, my own staff. I am pregnant. Should I continue to work? I am pregnant in this COVID pandemic. Should I take leave? Well, there are guidelines from RCOG which say we have seen that pregnancy does not increase the risk per se if you do not have any background comorbidities. Pregnant women at any gestation, you should offer the choice, but more or less, if you're less than 28 weeks, then you can practice social distancing and continue to work in a patient facing role. But if you're more than 28 weeks, you can try and avoid direct patient contact. Now, these are RCOG guidelines which are available. So this is a call that you need to take. If you're more than 28 weeks, you can choose to avoid direct patient contact. If it's a desk job, then probably you can continue to work. Or maybe if you have an option of work from home, which is unfortunately not there for us healthcare workers, then you could just exercise that. Now, for a confirmed or a suspect COVID-19 infection, what you would do. Now, most important thing that we have seen after this 4 to 5 months of pandemic, that please, respectful, skilled care is still the right of every pregnant woman, even in this pandemic. And this is what we seem to be losing. We need to examine with a gloved hand, but we should not lose the personal touch. And this is what we seem to be losing. So we need to counsel the woman. If the woman is having symptoms, first thing, do not panic. What really needs to change from previously is no walk-ins. That will only come if we keep on counseling a pregnant woman. She needs to identify a place where she can go, contact your maternity team. If you have severe symptoms, contact immediately. Do not attend your routine clinic, designated initial assessment area, because everywhere you go you will be screened. Keep minimum number of people. Do not use a public transport. If you are taking an ambulance, inform the call handler. The basic algorithm is any patient with the following symptoms will be screened at the initial triage or the screening area of every hospital. Or if there is any history of exposure, give the woman a surgical mask, keep a distance of 1 meter, and the assessment has to be bimodal. The infectious disease specialist would assess the severity, any baseline comorbidity. The obstetrician would also assess if there is any obstetric emergency or labor delivery issue. Now, if there is no medical morbidity, no elevated risk, no obstetric delivery issue, then you can advise her home isolation. And if the symptoms persist, then the testing can be advised. If, however, there is any other high risk or requires labor or indication for the purpose of any obstetric issue, then she will need admission. Now, immediately on admission with appropriate PPE, testing should be advised. However, again and again, repeated advice is that any care should not be delayed because of a non-availability of testing or because we are not able to test the patient. So every facility should be geared up to treat a patient as a suspect and symptomatically treat a patient and be able to handle the patient and provide adequate care even in the absence of a test. So if a COVID-19 positive patient is asymptomatic, no comorbidities, no obstetric emergency or labor, then the patient can be advised home isolation. And this is what we are doing now, sending the patient home, fetal monitoring for growth and Doppler after 2 weeks. Antenatal contacts, routine appointments can be delayed. No additional tests are required. If there are concerns about fetal well-being, patient should be advised to contact the maternal team. And counseling and information about potential risk of adverse pregnancy outcome. If the patient is symptomatic, the patient should be admitted, and depending on the symptoms, if the patient should be categorized according to her vitals, blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate, and if we think that there is any indication for an ICU admission, then the patient should be taken up into the ICU, and emergency cesarean should be done if the patient is in shock or an organ failure. Maternal surveillance, vitals, chest imaging, and oxygen therapy if the saturation is falling, and oral hydration. So again, the need for drug therapy is done as a multidisciplinary management in consultation with our physicians, and thromboprophylaxis is recommended or not. So there is a strong evidence for thromboprophylaxis in pregnancy now. Daily fetal movement count and is done with fetal heart rate monitoring. Antenatal corticosteroids is given unless there is active clinical signs of infection. In mild COVID infection, clinical benefits might outweigh the risks. Now, if the patient, what about the antenatal care once the patient has recovered? There is little evidence of natural history of pregnancy after recovery. So, if the patient has recovered in the first trimester, second trimester anomaly scan is done, and then 2 weekly growth scans are done after infection. So, for antenatal care, we would recommend that most of the pregnancy follow up is the same as non pregnant persons. Antenatal care through teleconferencing and video conferencing is the key to providing quality care during pandemic. Triage based on symptom severity and obstetric emergencies, and multidisciplinary approach to management of suspected or confirmed cases is to be done. Now, I will take you through the second part, which is actually the labor delivery management of the COVID patients. So, when we talk about the labor delivery management, most important part is facility preparedness in this patient, in these patients. Why I'm talking about facility preparedness is, before that, I would just like to say again that all of these patients, even if they are COVID positive, most important aspect is communication. Let them know that even if they are placed in an orange zone or a red zone, the care is not suffering. Communication is important and they need to be treated with respect and dignity. Preparedness is the key. The patients need to inform. So every pregnant patient has to identify a place where she needs to deliver, because not all places are equipped to handle a COVID positive patient. So every patient has to have a COVID, a place where she can deliver, or every center has to have an identified COVID referral place. So we say that there are 5 principles of facility preparedness. First of all, every place should have an SOP, that you will do when a COVID suspect comes to you. The second is infrastructure, that where is your screening area, where is your place to keep your suspect, and where is the place to keep your positive patients. The third is availability of a PPE. Fourth is the preparedness of your people. And fifth is the infection control practices. The SOP should be a written document, or at least an understanding of of where you are going to keep your suspect and your positive patients. Infrastructure does not mean that you have to build in a building. All you need is a small area where you can keep, or where you can arrange for your screening, because every patient who's coming into your facility should be screened by a basic questionnaire, that whether the patient is symptomatic. And once the patient is identified as a suspect, you can have a small room, at least depending on the delivery facility load, to keep your suspects till the tests are awaited. The testing policy should be very clear, whether you are testing based on symptoms or you are testing universally. It will be provided to you. So, depending on the testing policy of your facility, you should have the place to keep the suspects. And then, if they are negative, you take them to your normal labor room. If they are positive, you take them to the place which are designated for the positive patients. For the personnel, it is very important to have a staggered roster. The staff should be trained. The staff in the isolation room should be minimized, and there should be a COVID response team at all times. And very important to conduct mock drills to manage COVID patients. For PPE in labor room, what we do is, we have at all times the healthcare providers who are in the suspect labor room wearing an N95 mask, gloves, face shields, and a impermeable gown. At the time of conducting the delivery, it's always advisable to wear long boots. So this is the PPE that is advisable when you are conducting a labor delivery. although the second stage of labor is not strictly an aerosol generating procedure, but because you are very close to the patient, and especially the nursing staff is usually very close to the patient providing support, we need to take care at all times. Even in your normal labor rooms, it's not a bad idea to wear masks and face shield at all times, because even the most, it has been seen that the healthcare providers who are getting infected the most are actually in the areas which are the non-COVID areas. So it is, we as a policy, we say that wear your mask and face shield, especially during the second stage of labor, when the woman is in the second stage of labor. We all have been knowing that the infection control measures actually begin with the pregnant woman should be screened properly, the healthcare worker should be screened, there should be rational use of PPE, and the waste disposal should be very good. So the IPC policy of your hospital should be very well covered, and it should extend to the labor room at all costs, and we should be taking care that the cleaning and the waste disposal is very good at all times. To the triage, whom do you call as a suspect? So any pregnant woman who has any symptom of fever or respiratory distress, with a history of travel or residence in a hotspot during the last 14 days, or any patient with a acute respiratory illness or with a contact, or any patient with an acute respiratory illness in the absence of a diagnosis that fully explains the clinical presentation. And anyone with a positive test is a confirmed case. So when you have these case definitions, at the initial point of contact, you have triaged. And as discussed before, immediately give the patient a mask, maintain a distance of 1 meter. Again, after assessment, the patient is in labor, you will have to admit her. Assess for comorbidities. If the patient is in labor or with or without comorbidities, she will need admission. Now, after admission, you will do the maternal monitoring by, as in labor, that you do temperature, pulse rate, blood pressure, confirm the onset of labor as per standard care, and proper fetal monitoring. Now, if you think that the patient is in false labor and does not require continued admission, we have normally done patient at 35 weeks, came with false labor, monitored for 6 hours. You can actually send her home with proper counseling to come back after whenever she has a problem. So you can send the patient back with proper counseling regarding danger signs. If, however, she is in confirmed labor, then you continue care in the isolation room. Now, care in labor, what are the considerations? Important points. The management of normal labor is not altered. Birth companion is limited now. If we want a birth companion, the companion has to be screened. The same companion has to be there throughout the period of labor. We cannot have very, very prolonged labor, prolonged inductions. If we want to induce cervical ripening with mesoprost or balloon catheter, can be done. Mode of delivery has not been altered. You can allow a vaginal delivery because vaginal secretions do not infect the baby. Unless, as we discussed before, patient is in shock or any acute organ failure, it does not mandate a cesarean delivery. So you can very well manage your labor as you would do. So counsel the woman, consider woman's preferences. Cesarean section should be done only for obstetrical indications unless medically required. Planned induction. So individual assessment for urgency of induction. If you cannot delay, then follow the general advice for COVID-19, admit an isolation room, and consider standard precautions. Now, should we be testing? Well, if a patient is asymptomatic, the test is positive, and you need to induce, you think that induction of labor and cesarean for medical indications, it should not be postponed or rescheduled. Sometimes we feel that, the patient will maybe deteriorate because of the COVID-19 disease will deteriorate. So this is kind of a risky kind of a situation, but we have seen that the COVID-19 infection in pregnancy is essentially asymptomatic, does not really worsen a lot. So it is the obstetrics which actually guides the management of COVID-19. So if you feel that the patient needs induction for preeclampsia, then with all proper precautions, please go ahead and do the induction. So that is the general policy that has been followed. Timing of delivery again is not dictated by the presence of maternal COVID-19, and it is not an indication to induce labor. So if a patient is having COVID-19 at 36 weeks, it does not require delivery. So manage pregnancy and labor according to obstetrics and not COVID-19. So after recovery from COVID-19, if it was in early pregnancy, there is no alteration in the usual timing. If it is in the third trimester, as we said, it is reasonable to postpone if no other medical indication is available, is there. But as I said, it is the obstetrics which essentially guides the management rather than COVID-19. So if the mother is critically ill, to relieve the extra metabolic load, then in that situation, or if the patient is in shock, then in that situation, you might need to deliver the patient. So individualized based on the clinical stability of the mother, period of gestation, and the fetal conditions. The care in labor is as per standard practice. Maintain the saturation, titrate the oxygen therapy, watch for symptoms of difficulty and shortness of breath. ICU admission is again guided by the oxygen saturation, the pulse, the temperature, and the vitals. Now, in labor, the frequency of monitoring is individual basis, but in general, a continuous electronic fetal monitoring is recommended. Labor analgesia, generally, the regional anesthesia is recommended. General anesthesia is considered to be aerosol generating, so generally avoided, but with all precautions, if required, can be given. Antinox is not done. Surgical procedure to be done in designated COVID OTs, minimize the number and movement of the team. Regional anesthesia is preferred, and post-op care is as per standard precautions. Delayed cord clamping, it is still recommended if no contraindications. Skin to skin contact, individual choice with risks and benefits explained, but mostly it can be done with proper counseling, and proper respiratory precautions can be taken if the mother and baby are doing well. Breastfeeding, it can be done, it should be supported. Exclusive breastfeeding should be supported in a mother who's COVID-19 positive and is well enough to do the breastfeeding. It has been seen that at present the data are not sufficient to conclude vertical transmission through breastfeeding. In infants, the risk of COVID-19 is low. The infection is typically mild or asymptomatic. Consequences of not breastfeeding and separation between mother and child can be significant. So, at this point, COVID-19 represents a much lower threat to survival than other infections that breastfeeding is protective against. And breastfeeding, or benefits of breastfeeding, are more important when health and other community services are themselves disrupted. So, but at the same time, adherence to infection prevention and control measures are essential. So WHO recommends that breastfeeding should be encouraged. Mothers should be counseled that benefits of breastfeeding substantially outweigh the potential risks of transmission, and mother and infant should be enabled to remain together while rooming in throughout the day and night and to practice skin to skin contact. So if they are breastfeeding, what are the hygiene recommendation? Mother should wear a mask. Replace the masks as soon as they become damp. Dispose the mask. Do not reuse the mask if you're using the surgical mask. Not to touch the front of the mask. Do not sneeze or cough onto the baby. Regularly clean and disinfect surfaces. So practice respiratory hygiene. Wash hands before and after touching the baby. Routinely clean and disinfect the surface. If the mother is not able to breastfeed the baby, the first choice would be express milk. The second choice would be a human milk bank. And the third choice, if there is no other option, the third and the last choice would be a formula milk. So to summarize, the same recommendations as non-pregnant persons for avoiding exposure to severe SARS coronavirus 2. Management of labor is not altered in women giving birth during COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 is not an indication to alter the route of delivery. And in patients with known or suspected COVID-19, neuroxyl anesthesia is not contraindicated and has several advantages. And I would like to add one more point, that breastfeeding should be done, should be encouraged in patients who have delivered in COVID-19 positive mothers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aparna, for a very comprehensive management of the topic for discussion today. as you very rightly not only covered the topic but also mentioned that while we have to take all precautions, we cannot deny mothers of the right of care and to bring a healthy newborn to this world, which is a source of happiness for every family in these times of let me introduce on the panel Professor Sumesh, who is the head of our obstetric gynecology department and has been doing a fabulous job during this whole pandemic of providing obstetric care at AIIMS. And we'll share some of those experiences which we have, and we go on in the panel discussion. We have Neeraj from Department of Medicine, who will take up some of the questions which you have said about medical management during pregnancy. And Dr. Anu is from the neonatology division of the pediatrics, who will again, of course, it's very important to take care of the newborn, and we'll take questions on that. So several of the questions which have been sent by centers of excellence have already been covered for here, but we'll take some of them up for a kind of reinforcement, and some of the questions which have not been, topics which have not been covered will also be covered in these questions. And any questions that you would like to send, please send it on the chat, or there is a raise hand provision in Webex which you can use to ask a question. So the first question, sir, if I can ask you, is on how to go ahead with moderate symptomatic COVID-19 pregnant patient in second trimester. Has been asked by the state of Jharkhand.
Yes, if pregnant patient happens to be in second trimester of pregnancy and has moderate symptoms, we should not expect any significant alteration in the pregnancy part. She should be managed on the same line if we were managing a non-pregnant person. And we mostly see that with good management within 2 to 3 weeks, they recover from the infection. And same is with the pregnant women. Pregnancy continues, doesn't seem to have any significant alteration in course of pregnancy, and there's no significant increase in any complication in later part of pregnancy.
And a related question is, sir, is the preferred, I think that was covered again, but just to re-emphasize, the preferred approach for delivery from these asked in COVID-19.
And the delivery, a vaginal delivery is always a preferred mode, but those patients who are sick, where oxygen saturation is low, they are needing ventilative support. Only for such patient, we may prefer a cesarean delivery. Otherwise, rest of the patient can have normal delivery. And in case there happens to be any other indication for which cesarean is needed, that can be done.
Kanu, if I can ask you the question on safety of breastfeeding, which is covered, and the other related other question is on how to manage a newborn who's born with COVID-19.
So, if a newborn is born to a mother who's COVID-19 positive, so there are two major concerns. One, if the neonate is stable. So, if the neonate is stable, the neonate remains with the mother. The mother and the baby practice rooming in. So, mother observes hand hygiene, she wears a mask, and she has to continue breastfeeding for all newborn babies who are stable. So, baby remains with the mother. Baby is breastfed by the mother, and mother practices sanitary aspects like she's wearing a mask, she's doing hand hygiene before and after handling the baby. So if the baby is not stable, so if the baby is unstable, this baby has to go to a defined isolation facility. This is in ideal circumstances. This isolation facility has to be away from the main NICU or the main newborn care unit. Now, when I say away, we have to remember that in addition to being away, this has a separate corridor, a defined gateway. The doctors and the nurses taking care of this baby who is unstable are also separate from the routine NICU team. However, if you do not have a defined isolation facility, then you should keep the baby in a defined area within your unit, but then preferably in an incubator. Facility. So you mix these babies once they are diagnosed COVID-19 positive or once they are in the defined suspect areas. But for practically all other babies, and as we are seeing, generally the babies are stable. They should be roomed in with the mother, and we continue breastfeeding these neonates. Mothers give direct breastfeeding to these neonates.
A related question which I thought you covered, Anu, is can a sick newborn of COVID positive mother be kept in isolated room in normal NICU in the first month with us till the RT-PCR report comes?
Ideally, no. So this baby has to be in a separate designated isolation facility. However, majority of us might be working in constrained circumstances. Then you might consider bringing the baby to the NICU, but mind it, three things are very important. One, segregation and separation. Two, protection of your healthcare providers. And three, spread awareness and information. So your healthcare providers, the who are taking care of other newborn babies, need to be separate. This baby has to be separated by at least a meter, if not more, from the other babies, whether they are suspect or whether they are normal. If under best circumstances, then in a separate isolation designated facility.
Thank you. So other question is Dr. Neeraj is from medicine, and there are some questions on management of COVID during pregnancy, and some of them are in the chat also on the cytokine storm. So the question, Neeraj from Rajasthan, is on the use of immunomodulators. Are they safe in pregnancy? Guidance on use of tocilizumab for pregnant patients. And IL-6 inhibitors, what are the status for getting in pregnancy?
So again, we have to remember that whatever therapy which we are using in management of COVID-19, whether it's remdesivir, immunomodulators like tocilizumab, itolizumab, or for that matter plasma therapy, they all are have been approved based on compassionate ground, as we have so many patients, sick patients, even if it causes some benefit, so that they get benefit from that. So in case, I will just take it one by one. So regarding plasma therapy, this plasma has been used in pregnant patient in the past for other indications safely. So if we apply the same thing, and we have reports where plasma therapy has been used in pregnant patients in COVID-19, and they have been safely used without any complication arising out of plasma therapy. So yes, theoretically it can be used, but we have to remember that again, role of plasma therapy in COVID-19 is again a controversial thing. The data is still emerging. So you have to assess the risk and benefit before considering plasma therapy in any pregnant patient. Regarding remdesivir, again, it's an experimental therapy. Most of the trials which has been carried world over on remdesivir has not included pregnant patient. But since US FDA and even DCGI has permitted this drug for use of COVID-19 on compassionate ground, data have emerged based on the treatment from pregnant patients in Ebola or Marburg virus infection plus COVID-19 also. So remdesivir has been found to be safe in such patients so far. But again, you have to assess whether your patient actually requires remdesivir or not. All patients should not be receiving remdesivir. Only if clinically indicated, then you should consider your patient for remdesivir. Regarding immunomodulators, they are the most controversial of the lot. And again, the iatrogenic potential of such immunomodulator is very high based on the rheumatological indications which we have seen for the use of these immunomodulators. So their role is controversial. So again, somebody has asked how to manage patients of cytokine storm, because the role of these immunomodulators is basically more for managing cytokine storm. So if the condition of the patient is such that saving life gets priority, of course, anytime. So in that case, if clinically indicated, tocilizumab can be tried, but again, the consent of the patient and the relative about the potential harm to the fetus has to be taken before giving that. But as things stand, pregnant patient
should preferably avoid getting these immunomodulators until unless it's a matter of life and death. And
Yeah.
so these were the questions regarding
There's
therapy.
limited evidence for use of
Yeah,
this.
except for remdesivir, and plasma therapy, other therapies should be preferably avoided. And again, use of plasma and remdesivir has to be individualized based on the need of the patient.
What about steroids, which is the only really established
Yeah, so we have seen that steroids definitely save life if used in moderate severity patient. That is when actually the immune system of the patient is getting out of control. So the judicial use of steroid has to be done, and what type of steroid is to be used, that depends on the trimester in which the patient has presented. So for asymptomatic and mild patients, steroid should not be used. That's very clear. There is no role of steroid in such patients. But if a patient has started developing need of oxygen, her saturation is coming down, and patient has progressed from mild to moderate, that is when actually we are anticipating now that immune system is getting rogue, and that needs to be controlled. In that scenario, steroid should be used depending on in which trimester the patient has presented. So if the patient has presented in first trimester, then of course methylpred has high potential of causing cleft lip and with or without palate. So methylprednisolone should be avoided in first trimester. In the first trimester or in second trimester, you can think of using this prednisolone or hydrocortisone if required. And if the patient is planned to be induced, in that scenario, you can use dexamethasone. And once that induction part is over, then you can always use, when delivery has happened, then you can use any of the steroid, methylpred or dexamethasone based on the need. So again, depending on the clinical indication, steroids should not be used in all patients, only used if indicated, and depending on which trimester the patient has presented, whether we are planning an immediate delivery where the lung maturity of the fetus is important or not. Those aspects have to be taken into account before deciding about that.
Thank you, Neeraj. There are two questions, sir, on testing, which is a bit of a subjective thing. One is asked from Tamil Nadu and one from Gujarat. One question is, should all mothers be screened 1 week before delivery? And the second question is, should COVID testing be mandatory for all elective LSCS? So what is our hospital's policy? And
I think this policy may vary from hospital to hospital, and also availability of the test, and also the attitude of, I mean, anesthesia people. In my hospital, anesthesia person, they insist that report should be available, preferably done in previous 24 hours. So for us, it is a thing we are doing for all patient who are planned for a cesarean. An extension of that, patient where we were planning induction of labor, we get this test done. You never know which patient in labor may suddenly require a cesarean section.
I think you have very rightly said it's a matter of resource, so wherever feasible, it should be done. But otherwise, you have to take all precautions.
Can I add on this?
Yeah. Neeraj, you want
So
to add
yeah,
something?
so the question somebody had asked is, should all mothers be screened 1 week before delivery? Now we have to remember that if somebody turns out to be negative, that doesn't mean he will not turn out to be positive 1 week after that. So again, the clinical scenario you have to take into account, whether the patient is coming from an area which is containment zone or has history of contact, or so it cannot be a black and white approach. Depending on how to safeguard your healthcare workers and the outcome of the patient, you have to take a call whether the patient requires testing or not.
Anu, there's a question from you, and it's been asked from the UAE worker. Is the effect of lymphocytopenia, elevated CRP, AST, liver enzymes in the mother on the newborn?
So a single line, if I were to say that the evidence is still coming up, it is too early to say whether maternal lymphocytopenia, maternal elevated CRP, or her raised AST, ALT would have any influence. So there is absence of good quality studies to confirm or to refute this question. So we are waiting, and so all of you should also wait. Maybe we have something coming up from India only and going for or against this, but till now the evidence is not there.
The other question is on the possibility of COVID transfer by placenta. And it's a very favorite question. Chat box.
So, when we talk about vertical transmission through placenta, so it's the kind of thing that there is not enough evidence to say. Now, if you say why, so there's a very beautiful article and a lot of discussion going on about it. Now, why there cannot be less chances? Why are there less chances? First of all, there is no viremia in this disease. So if there is no viremia, the virus going through the placenta to the baby, the first of all, the chances become very less. Now, there was one report which said that they did identify a virus inside the placenta. Now, in that particular case, the baby did not have, the baby tested negative. They saw the virus in the placenta, the baby tested negative. Then, in another situation, there was a cord blood tested positive, that the baby tested negative. In another situation, cord blood IgM was positive, but later on became negative. So these are situational reports, case reports, so there is no solid evidence. Again, we have to take the bigger picture. Even if there is an infection, what is it causing to the baby? If it's a mild infection which is actually recovering, baby is not getting affected, are we really concerned about it? So it's a huge big picture that we really need to take into account. There are a lot of studies which are going on, so I think we really need time to comment on it, and we should not really worry about actual congenital transmission unless it is actually causing some congenital malformation, abortion, stillbirths. So I think we are too early in the day to comment about vertical transmission. I think we should take time and not give a verdict on it.
Thanks, Aparna. There's something Neeraj wanted to add on the effect of lymphocytopenia and raised biomarker and CRP in pregnancy.
So, basically, this lymphopenia, especially at the time of presentation when patient is not on steroid, elevated CRP or deranged liver function, they are marker of a severe form of disease. So, if you find this in a pregnant patient, then chances of this patient landing up into a severe form of disease is very high. And once if the maternal health is affected, yeah, indirectly it can affect the health of the newborn, and that's the reason why various people are actually emphasizing on following up these patients with these markers so that at least one can predict which patient may land up into a severe form of disease, and that can affect the outcome of the newborn as well.
So, Neeraj, there's a related question on guidance of management of COVID patients before 37 weeks of pregnancy who come with respiratory distress. Is it any different in them? I think
Yeah.
spoken that, but just
Yeah,
important to re-emphasize.
So again, if the patient has, if the patient is in respiratory distress, so the patient will be either moderate, severe, or patient may be in frank ARDS. So management of patient in ARDS will remain like as we do in any of the other patient, which will be ventilatory support, plus the use of the antiviral steroid plasma therapy as and when the treating team deem fit. But for the moderate patient who are not requiring ventilatory support, but they are desaturating, or if their respiratory rate is high and there is very high chance that they will progress into severe disease, steroid may be life saving in such patients. Again, choice of steroid will depend on the trimester in which they have presented. So if they are in early trimester when they are not planned to deliver, so at that time steroids which do not cross placenta, or which are not teratogenic, they should be preferred. So we usually prefer hydrocortisone.
I can't hear you.
To the cutoffs we use in otherwise COVID patients.
So pregnancy is a prothrombotic state, so D-dimer values may be high. That's why if a patient is requiring oxygen, like Dr. Aparna has clearly mentioned that there should be there is no contraindication in using heparin in such patient, whether it's low molecular weight heparin or infection heparin, because the COVID-19 is also a prothrombotic disease, plus pregnancy is also a prothrombotic state. So one of the common cause of mortality in such patients is supposed to be microemboli, whether it's pulmonary embolism or microemboli to other organs. So there should be no hesitation in using heparin in such patients if they require oxygen and have been put on steroid. So again, D-dimer will give a pointer whether these patients have higher tendency of getting these type of complications.
I think
Sir,
we
for how
covered
long
more or
it
less
continue?
most of the questions. If there are any, if you would like to ask, you could probably raise your hand and ask. One last question again, which has been discussed, is Anu, but you would like to re-emphasize on breastfeeding. That's been asked, the safety of breastfeeding.
So there is no doubt that the advantages of breastfeeding clearly surpass the risk of possible vertical transmission. Number one. Number two, in addition to that, breastfeeding protects against so many other diseases, because of which, in a country like India, a child is expected to die because of diarrhea and pneumonia. So, because of this, the inherent advantages and whatever possible risk till now has not been demonstrated, there is no reason to separate a stable baby from the mother. These babies should be given direct breastfeeding. Now, if the baby is unstable and goes inside a separate isolation area, even then, if the baby's condition is ready to accept feeds, mother should express breast milk and send it to the baby, which can be given by orogastric or Paladay feeding. So continue breast milk feeding either direct or through orogastric or Paladay in case the baby needs so. But breastfeeding is the norm in all these babies.
Thank you. That's a very important message today. I think we do not have any other questions, so we can, sir, would you like to give some closing remarks before we end? And we thank everybody in the panel to have joined today. Professor Sumesh, Aparna, Dr. Anu.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, pregnancy itself is a prothrombotic event. If a patient of documented microembolism is there and we are either thrombolizing or giving injectable heparin, on discharge, for how long shall we continue as a routine protocol of 4 to 6 weeks of oral anticoagulant? And if at all on oral, which one should be preferred if a patient is in first or second trimester?
So again, this warfarin has a potential teratogenic potential, so that should be avoided. That's very clear. And COVID-19 per se is not an indication for a prolonged thrombo prophylaxis. So if we have a clinical indication, if patient has developed DVT, pulmonary embolism, that is an indication for continuing antithrombotic, and choice of antithrombotic will depend on the clinical condition of the patient, which trimester the patient is. If the patient is delivered, then the choice of anticoagulant will not matter much, except maybe for breastfeeding and all. Sir, would you like to add on
No,
that?
I completely agree with you. Per se, COVID is not an indication for giving anticoagulation beyond the period when the patient has recovered, unless there are other indications like atrial fibrillation or has a prosthetic valve or has developed DVT. So during pregnancy, I think low molecular weight heparin is quite safe, or unfractionated heparin. It requires more monitoring. These are the two anticoagulations that can be safely given, but in uncomplicated cases, there is no need to give anticoagulation beyond recovery from COVID-19.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Sir, would you just like to say some closing remarks?
I think we all of us are facing uncertain time, uncertain situations, dealing with a disease which we hadn't earlier read or heard about it. But I am sure with the knowledge which is adding every day and with the experience, all of you are managing it well. As time passes, we'll get more information, we will be wiser. But whatever knowledge is there in front of us today, we are doing best for our patients. And I wish all of you doctors, health workers, take care of themselves also, in addition to looking after patients. Thank you.